century St. Patrick's Cathedral, and it's the largest of the surviving buildings left here on top of the Rock of Castle today. It's a cruciform building, so you'll notice we're standing now in our chancel, our altar area. We have a northern and southern transept, and we walked up through our nave where our congregation is gathered. But the nave, in contrast to our chancel or choir area here today, is considerably shortened with the arrival of what was your 15th century Bishop's Palace or Tower House. Unfortunately, with religious buildings, you can't put another structure to the north, south or east of a building. It has to be located on the west, and the downside of the western side of the site here is that the land just falls off or disappears. So they were limited in terms of their space when they put up this building here. It would have served the function as the Archbishop's residence or the Bishop's residence, and most of our tower houses dotted throughout the Irish landscape, of which there are thousands sitting on the bank of nearly every river on the island of Ireland. They would have been built on a hierarchical structure. So the more important you were, the higher up you would have lived in the building. Ground level would have been used as an animal or a food store. Not necessarily the most fragrant of periods, but animals were important not only as a means of food, but they kept the heat in the building as well, hot air rising all the way up. And in some cases, the higher up in the building you were, you would have found a private chapel. You're closer to God in that respect. Now, we haven't found evidence of a chapel in that space because it was on a religious site. There's plenty of it floating around in here. Also in the centre, you see a new 15th century build, and that was added. All these 15th century buildings were added by one particular man. His name is Archbishop O'Haydon, and a lot of money came into the church during that time period, and it's when what I like to call the cathedral effect would have been added to this building. So they would have added beautiful stucco work or plaster work to all the walls. They would have had frescoes, which are your paints onto damp or wet plaster. You would have had fine draping of silk cloths and tapestries, rugs on the wall. They added a decorative feature, but they also would have added heat to the building, and you would have had beautiful stained glass windows. But you may recall Archbishop Price, and he deciding to cease activity up here. By him making that decision to cease activity, he actually stripped the entirety of the building. All the stained glass windows would have been removed, all the stucco work, plaster work, baptismal fonts, pews, anything you can think of was stripped and brought down and into the centre of town. Leaving behind then a very exposed building, and it was also a building that actually at that point had lost part of its roof. The only area that still had a roof left in it after Archbishop Price left was in our northern transept and here in our chancel and in our altar area. Then all you need is a good gust of wind to tuck and underneath that roof and take it clean off. And eventually that's what would have happened during the decade of the 1840s. Not only did Ireland suffer from a great famine, but we also suffered from horrible winter periods. They called them the Great Winds. You're talking hurricane-like weather during those winter periods, causing massive structural damage. So we lost the last of our roofs, we lost the gable end of this building here, and you may have noticed as we climbed the steps and up and into this building today, there's a massive chunk of stone of masonry just sitting there in the grass. That fell off the front door during the winter of 1841 and 1842. So a lot of structural damage was caused. You can imagine not only beautiful plasterwork but pigment sitting on all the walls. Now to date we haven't found any colour or pigment in this building, but that's not to say that it wasn't there in its time. And in most cases they would have been biblical or religious scenes dotted throughout. The site has been a religious site since 1101, but we've also found human remains dating to an earlier period. The oldest human remains recovered on the Rock of Castle date to the 9th century, and they've come from an infant graveyard. They're all infant human remains. So that's during the time of the kings of Munster. The oldest marked grave that you can very clearly read dates to 1574, and our most recent burials have happened here on top of the Rock of Castle was this year in February, the 29th of February. To be exact, so quite a recent burial in that regard. Burials are still happening here, but they're happening on a much more limited basis. So in 1930, legislation was passed by our new Irish government that any national monument which has a burial ground or a graveyard has to close to public burials. But what they did allow were people who already had a family plot and people who belonged to them put their name on a register, which stayed open for the entire year of 1930. Once your name is on that register, you have the right to be buried up here. We don't have control over that register. There's a man at the end of the hill. Did you notice Granny's kitchen when you get off the bus? Yeah. So Michael Dwyer is the man that holds the ledger. Yay thick. And he will be able to go through each plot. So a family will come to and say, I think my father has the right to be buried here on top of the rock. Our plot is number 25. He'll be able to go down through the list of 25 to see if that name is featured. If it's not, it's a case of, sorry, you don't have the right to be buried up here. Yeah. You can imagine if your name is on it since 1930 as well, you're not getting any younger. So those names are starting to dwindle. One impressive person though that is buried here on top of the rock is actually buried here in our chancel. So if you kind of come up a little bit closer, you'll see what is or who is